Welcome to the Buick Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Sheldon Marion, and on this podcast, we dive deep into the outdoors. We discuss hunting and fishing techniques, give you tips and tricks, tell stories, and everything in between to help you enjoy the outdoors. This podcast is brought to you by Northbound Gear. If you've been around here for a while, you have seen that I pretty well exclusively wear Northbound Gear pants, whether it's the adventure, water resistant, and cut resistant pants or the waterproof jeans. They're just excellent stand up gear. They have those pants. They also have some summer pants as well that zip off into shorts. They have jackets, things for men and women, and they also have a bunch of accessories as well. If you want to check those guys out, they're at northboundgear.co. And for you guys listening and watching this, if you use the promo code Sheldon15 at checkout, you'll receive 15% off your order, and that's including the sale items. Also, with Northbound Gear, they partner up with One Tree Planted, so for every purchase, you also plant a tree. So head over to northboundgear.co, check those guys out, use the promo code Sheldon15 to receive 15% off, and get yourself some good gear. Well, you guys, welcome back to another podcast. A couple days ago, I shot a nice little 4x3 mule deer buck. It's been quite a few years since I got one of them, and I don't even remember the last time I shot a mule deer. It's been quite a few years, but I also haven't really tried for a mule deer, to be honest with you. When I was living out in Buick, we used to have a bunch out there. Then they kind of died off quite a bit from a real bad winter, and then they opened up a 3-point season, and that kind of, whatever was left over, it kind of nuked them. Because I think there was a 3-point season and a doe season, and whatever was left over just kind of got wiped out. But anyways, I got a nice little 4x3, so I cut my tag there. Kind of messes me up for my limited entry draw that I had for a mule deer doe in December. I was actually really looking forward to hunting in December, but, well, I guess that's not going to happen. But we got meat in the freezer anyways. With that, today I want to talk about kind of doing your own butchering at home. There's a lot of pros and cons to doing your own butchering. For some people, they really just don't have a clue on what they're doing, and I mean that's pretty well myself included. And then also it kind of comes down to three things. It's like knowing what to do and not wanting to screw it up, the time it takes, and then also like the cost of everything to somewhat do it properly. When I say that, really, if you're just starting out, or even if you're just a seasoned guy, you just don't want any of like the extras, all you really need is a couple of nice good knives, a handsaw, which 99% of hunters already have as is, and then like a cheap little meat grinder. And other than that, I mean, that's really the only things that you actually quote unquote like need. Uh, then there's a couple of other things, like the butcher wrap paper. If you wrap it, for me, I have a vacuum wrapper, so I vacuum seal everything. I just I like it more. It keeps longer. It's easier to thaw out in your fridge. Um, Time wise, though, it does take a little bit more time, but in the end, you do get a better result, and it costs a little bit more. I don't know how much a big roll of that butcher wrap is. I want to say it was fairly cheap. The last time I bought it, which was again several years ago. But then like the vacuum wrappers, we'll call it $100 for one of them, and then the wrapping bags themselves. I bought 2 of the 8-inch wide by 20 feet or 18 feet rolls. I think that was about $22, so we'll call it 25. And then the 11-inch ones are roughly the same, except I don't think they're quite as long. I think they're only about 16 feet. But with that, I was able to butcher my entire deer Uh, get a bunch of steaks. Uh, I made, I think, one roast with it, and it was just like one of the rounds. You pretty well have eye round, outside round, inside round. I just kind of took that whole chunk and just vacuum wrapped that, and on the outside I just wrote, you know, round roast, cook for a very long time. But with that all being said, you do, if you get into cutting up your own meat, you are into it for a couple $100. And it's one of those things where if you don't take it to a butcher, you pretty well get back the majority of your cost with that first trip to the butcher. Um, the one thing that doesn't necessarily work that great though is when you get into making your own uh like snack sticks, pepperoni, jerky, and all that stuff. Because then you have to take into consideration, like a sausage stuffer, uh, all the seasonings, the smoker, sausage casings, dehydrator, I guess, if you want to use that instead of a smoker. And that's where the price of things kind of start to add up a little bit. Uh, Now, the sausage stuffer, it's not exactly necessary. When you buy a meat grinder, uh, the majority of them, I won't say all of them, but the majority of them come with the casing tubes, like in a package with the grinder. Uh, Maybe not so much if you buy like a real cheap one off of like Amazon or something, where they're like $50, or I want to say a majority of the hand cranked ones. But even the hand cranked ones, if you're gonna be butchering like a deer, I would not recommend a hand crank one whatsoever. A hand crank one, that's if you have, like, if you want to make like a pound or two of hamburger every so often, then they're great. But anything more than, like, I would say probably about 10 pounds of hamburger, I don't think you want to have a hand crank one. Uh, Plus, they're not exactly cost effective either. I was just looking at, I believe it was LEM. For the cheapest hand crank that they have, I think it was $50. The cheapest electric one that they have is like 90. The 91 you can do 3 pounds a minute, I believe it was saying, and I'm pretty sure that's the one that I have, and I've done a couple of deer with them now. I did a moose with it, and that was like the whole moose by myself, and then several bears as well. But and that's just the cheapo. I can't remember how much. I think when I bought it, it was $90, and now they're about 130. But yeah, whatever. $130 for a meat grinder, and it came with obviously the blades, the coarse, the fine. Uh, I don't know what you call the other one, but it's like a bunch of weird triangles all the way around. It's like 7 or 8 kind of triangles. I Maybe like the stuffing one. I don't know. Whatever it is. And then it came with two sausage tubes. I don't know the exact size, but one is for doing like those 1 pound log uh, hamburger casings kind of a deal. And then the other one is for like sausage casings. And then I had to buy an attachment for sheep casings for doing like pepperoni sticks, and they're like the real thin ones. Uh, but yeah, $130 nowadays. That's not too bad. Especially, I don't know what it's like where you're at, but for us around northern BC, uh, our options for butchers, it's extremely thin. Um, I want to say there's one in Burl Prairie, one in Chatwin, one in Charlie Lake, possibly one in Dawson Creek. I might be missing one or two, but that's four butchers in a massive area. If you look at a map of northern BC and you pretty well go from Dawson Creek to Fort Nelson, the amount of land and people that live in that area, we have like four, maybe five, possibly six butchers for that entire area, and like a good majority of people that live up here hunt. So yeah, if you live up here, it's one of those things where I would recommend you kind of get at least familiar with butchering your own stuff. And for me, that's why I got into it. It wasn't to save any money at all. Uh, the convenience of just dropping off your animal and saying, "Hey, call me when it's done," that is nice, because like there's a lot of times where I just, to be honest and frank about it, I just don't want to do it. But sometimes you almost have to, otherwise there's just not a butcher around or available, or they're full or whatever. And then yeah, I guess you can take quarters of meat, lay them in your deep freeze, and freeze them rock solid until the butcher says they're ready to go. But that it's not exactly the best way to doing it. But yeah, when it comes to butchering your own animals, for me, myself, I basically I went onto YouTube and I just searched, like processing deer, butchering deer at home, how to cut up deer by yourself, and the amount of knowledge that's out there just on YouTube alone, let alone Google and people on Facebook and stuff like that. Like it's overwhelming on what you can actually learn, and for the most part, it's pretty straightforward. As long as you don't get into like the fancy cuts and stuff like that. Basically, the front quarters of a deer, it's like, or of any wild animal really. We'll focus more on deer because they're pretty small. On some of the bigger animals like elk and moose, you can get some of those weirder, kind of fancier cuts or whatever. But for the most part, when it comes to deer, even something like the ribeyes, they're this big, and you butterfly them, so and they're about that wide and that thick, right? Uh, so and then when it comes to those other, whatever, I keep calling them like the fancy cuts or whatever, on a massive beef cow, like you'll get a steak that's this big. Well, technically speaking, a deer has that chunk of muscle wherever in his back leg somewhere, but it's this big, so it's like, yeah, it's not even worth cutting out to call it a steak. It's just a chunk of meat. But basically, when it comes to deer, your front quarters, other than the back straps and your neck, even the neck, it's pretty iffy. It's basically all hamburger. You can do like shanks, neck roast. What's that stuff called when you cut up the shanks into probably about 2 inch long strips? When you cut them this way, ossobuco. Like you can make deer shank, whatever it's called, and that would be great. But for the most part, yeah, it's basically just all hamburger. You can do like a picnic. Uh, what is it called? Picnic roast out of the front shoulder. And again, I think they usually use a saw to cut that one out. But again, just search it up on YouTube. I don't really know my cuts that great. But then on the back straps, you have your, right between the the front quarters down to about the end of the ribs. It's all just beautiful little rib eyes, and you start getting into like the New Yorks by the end of the ribs. Uh, and then that's also on the inside where your tenderloin is. So if you use a saw and you cut it, straight this way, that's where you get your T-bone steaks. That thick side is your New York. The thin side is your tenderloin, and uh, a T-bone is identical to a porterhouse. The only thing that's different is if your tenderloin is bigger than 1 1/4 inch. If it's bigger than 1 1/4 inch, then it's porterhouse. If it's smaller, it's T-bone. That's the only thing difference. And then after that, getting into like the top of the butt is your sirloins, and then inside the sirloin, along like the femur, you have your outside round, inside round. Um, what else is there? That's about it, really. And again, like this is just me kind of spitballing out there. But yeah, for the most part, you like your front quarters are hamburger. You have your back straps that run from the base of the neckish, maybe a little bit lower, kind of like collarbone type area, all the way down to basically the tail is just one giant back strap, and that's where the majority of your steaks are gonna come from. And then on the hindquarters, right on the top, is it top or the back side? It's kind of like your sirloins. You can cut those out, make them into steak, and then other than that, you have all your round roasts, and they're okay as a roast as long as you roast them real low and slow, and you really break down the proteins and the collagen and all that stuff, and try to make it tender. Otherwise, the rounds are they're not good. You can marinate them or you can pound them out to tenderize them, but the majority of times, round steaks, round roasts, they're just tough and chewy, and they're not that pleasant to really eat unless you actually put in some time and effort to tenderize them. So for me, the majority of the hind end is also uh, ground. Um, that is where it's also nice to where when you take it to a butcher and you just tell them, hey, just do a straight cut. For a deer up here, I think it's 130 or 150 bucks. For a moose or an elk, it might be a little bit more. Say it's 200. I don't really remember. I don't really know because uh, a lot of times when it comes to like moose and elk, I'll usually get like jerky or smokies or something else made too, and it's one of those things where I don't even pay attention. I just say, call me when it's done. I come in, I pay for it, and off I go, kind of a deal. So I don't really pay attention to the price because I know off the hop it's gonna be expensive regardless. Uh, but then it also comes down to actually taking the time and having the right equipment to do it. Uh, for me to butcher my deer by myself, um, well, there's also the aspect where you need to hang it. If you don't have a place where you can actually properly hang it up, it can be kind of tough. Here where I live, I mean, I can string a 2x4 between two trees and hang a deer off of there, and I don't think anybody's gonna say anything. But if you're, living in downtown Edmonton, I don't think you're gonna get away with that. Um, but yeah, so for me, I'm fairly lucky that way. But if you're in a city setting, um, yeah, you're gonna need a butcher for hanging it, or I don't know. What I did this year is I just waited like the it was about a day and a bit, and then I just cut it up. Just let the rigor mortis come out of the meat, and then it kind of goes back to being like not all tensed up and stuff. And then after that is when you kind of start your aging process. If you're gonna hang it for 7, 14, 21, whatever, and you start dry aging it basically. But yeah, to get back onto topic here, um, where was I? Yeah, taking the time to cut it up. For me to cut up my deer, um, I want to say it took me probably about 5 or 6 hours doing it by myself. With Shelby doing the vacuum wrapping though, I didn't do that part. Shelby was here help me out with that. Uh, but yeah, everything else, and again, that's from me just not really doing it very often. Like every couple of years, I kind of butcher something up, and then also kind of do like a butcher job of it. Like it's I don't know the cuts very well. I'm just kind of going, I don't know. Looks like a steak, I guess, maybe. I'm not too sure. But yeah, so say it takes you, say it takes you 5 hours to do a deer. For a moose, it takes you pretty well 7 hours, 8 hours. Because, like, again, you're just kind of doing it at home. You got maybe two knives. I just used my two knives that are in my kitchen set. One was like a 5 inch, somewhat of a deboning knife, and then the other one is like a 7 inch slicer, and that's all I used. So I mean, it can be done with what you already have, plus my little electric meat grinder. So I mean, if you don't have the time, like if I worked a regular Monday to Friday job, it would be a weekend to do up a deer, basically, especially by myself. If it was you and one or two other buddies, ideally, if it was you and three other people, it'd be like perfect. Everybody takes a quarter, everybody starts knocking off the outside skin, and then you just kind of get after it basically. And then that way, that would clear up so much time. It would cut that time in like a quarter or a half, kind of a deal. That would make things go by much much faster. But yeah, um, one thing I didn't discuss is a place. If you don't have a proper place to cut it up to, you're gonna be either divorced, single, or in a pretty bad argument. For me, I'm pretty lucky. Where my woman there, she doesn't really complain overly too much about that, and it was actually her idea to use the uh, kitchen table. I have my little 5 foot, whatever it is, fold up plastic table that I brought inside, and I was gonna do it in the boot room, and then basically I was gonna do one or two quarters at a time. Take that meat, put it into the fridge, grab the other quarter or two, get that one done up, and kind of do it in stages. And she said, "Well, why don't you just use the big kitchen table that we have upstairs? It's what is it, like a 4.5 by 4.5 foot wide wood table, and her grandparents used to use it as their butchering table. So hey, might as well keep on the tradition kind of thing. And as long as she don't mind, because it's not my table. Also, she helps with the cleanup. So I mean, like, and she'd have to live with me sitting in the kitchen, butchering up this deer for basically a day. But yeah, if you don't have a spot to do it too, that can kind of be a bit of a nuisance. Uh, I mean, for a cheap way, you could just get like one of those, what do you want to call them? The little car tents you can get at like the little car shelters. They're anywhere between $2 to $1,000, like $200 to $1,000, depending on the size that you get. But that with a little, $60 fold up table, you can get the job done there. You would be able to really hang it in there, just because those things in the winter you could, in the colder months absolutely, but in the warm months, I mean, it's a tent. If it's hot outside, it's gonna be hotter inside that tent, and yeah, that meat's gonna spoil right away. But yeah, if it's in the winter time or fall where it's actually kind of cool, all throughout the day, I think you'd be able to hang it in there. You'd have to build like somewhat of a stand though. I wouldn't want to hang meat off of those little flimsy 1 inch poles kind of deal. You'd probably end up bending them. But yeah, in a nutshell, uh, whether or not it's worth it, I I can't 100% say yes or no. I think with a lot of people, they just like knowing how it was butchered. They like the challenge comes with butchering it themselves. And it's a bit of a pride thing where they can say, yeah, I did this myself. You can also be real picky with it. Um, for me, when it comes to especially deer, I don't like any fat on it at all. Uh, it kind of spoils in the freezer. I don't like any bone in it either. That spoils in the freezer. And then also just even like your hamburger when you cook it up, you get that weird waxy, I don't know what you want to call it, in the roof of your mouth and like on your tongue and stuff. If you eat something like a whitetail or mule deer with a lot of its natural fat in it, and it's just not good. It's kind of gross to me. But as long as you knock all that fat off, it's no problem at all. Uh, some butchers are kind of lazy too. They'll just quickly hack up a deer kind of a thing and they get it done and over with, which is fine if they're on a time crunch, but they don't remove any fat, they don't remove any silver skin, they don't really trim it at all, you know what I mean? Like, basically, it's the definition of just like a bad butcher kind of a thing. It's a rush job or whatever the case may be. Uh, this way, you know for sure exactly how that deer was cut. It's in the cuts that you like, the way that you like it. So I mean, if you're a picky guy, it can be real rewarding in that way. But for the most part, I think for the majority of people, I would almost say that it's cheaper and better just to take it to a butcher. Because when you take into consideration like the amount of time that it takes you, I mean, you're in a way you are losing like your day off to do this. If you put a money value onto that, take what your daily wage is and say, okay, it's going to cost me this much to do my deer because it did take you like 8 hours to butcher up your deer. Now, if you went to work for 8 hours, say you make $300 a day. Well, that $300, if you would have just paid a butcher 130 to do a straight cut, in a way, you're almost saving money. But I mean, I don't know. That's just me kind of justifying spending money on something like this. Also, again, if you are like a Monday to Friday guy, like the majority of people are, uh, I mean, if you're not really a busy body, then it's not that bad. For me, I'm always on the go though. So for me, if I lose a day because I'm butchering, I'm losing a day to go back out hunting, go get another deer, go get some chickens, go fishing, whatever it is. So for me in that aspect too, it's kind of almost not worth it. Um, but again, it's all just personal preference. Uh, that's why like if somebody says or asks, is it worth it to butcher it yourself? Depending on what your outcome is, and what you want your outcome to be. If you want to just do it just to say you did it, absolutely. If you want to do it for the experience, yes, it's definitely worth it. If you want to do it because, it's quality time that you're going to be spending with your kid, your significant other, your grandparents, or you're wanting to do just a new tradition, then by all means, do the butchering yourself, and it will come with its own separate, amazing rewards. Now, if you're wanting to do it to save money, after a few animals, you'll start to save a bit of money. Um, if you're wanting to do it, to, I don't know, some people are kind of forced into doing it too, like I was, then it's worth it. Because it's either, well, you either do it yourself or you just don't hunt. You know, so I'm gonna be cutting it up myself. But now that I have options with, I actually have a good butcher. With a good butcher though, sometimes you can get a little busy. But that's no big deal. I'll debone my meat and I'll put it into the freezer, and then when he's good and ready to go, and he has some spots cleared out, I'll pull the meat and I'll let it kind of thaw out a little bit, or I'll just bring it to him frozen, rock hard, and I'll go, well, sorry, my man, but here you go. Here's the meat. It's all deboned, but it's frozen. Then you have to sit on it for however long, probably about 3 days or so, to let it slowly thaw out in his own freezer. But yeah, I think what it comes down to it when it comes down to actually butchering your own animals, it it's essentially whether or not you enjoy doing it or you're forced to do it. I think. Uh, Other than that, the pros and cons for saving time and saving money, I don't know. The amount of time and money that takes to get started, like knives, sharpeners, saws, you already have that. Uh, Vacuum wrapper versus butcher paper, again, it's pretty minimal there. Uh, Say it's $100 for vacuum wrapper and two of the bags, and then that'll pretty well get a deer done. And then when it comes to just your own time, oh, and the meat grinder, they're $130. So it's not that expensive. And then for your time itself, again, if you just enjoy doing it or you just have a day off where you can get it done, then that's great. But other than that, if you had big plans coming up next weekend, but you got a deer this weekend and you have a place to store it and hang it for a week, well, now these plans are going to be put on hold because now you have to cut up your deer, or you can kind of do it throughout the week, I guess. Yeah, there's that way, I guess. And then didn't really think about that because I've always just done it in one go, just kind of get it done and over with. But yeah, and then when it comes to doing up like your own sausage and jerkies and stuff, it starts to get pretty expensive there. I know a lot of people, they'll do it just in their oven or in a dehydrator if you're making like real small batches. But if you're wanting to do anything in large quantities, uh, you're gonna want to step up your game. Whether, at least nowadays, it seems like almost everybody except me has like a pellet grill kind of a deal. I think I'm falling behind on that. And you can use that as a smoker. If not, there's the little chiefs and big chief smokers. They're kind of like the low cheap ends of smokers. You can get those at like any retail store kind of thing. But again, even those are around 80 to $100. Uh, then there's Bradley smokers, 4 racks and 6 racks, and those are starting to get expensive. I have one of the 6 racks. I want to say that was like $800 when I bought it. I've used it a handful of times and I hate it. So that was like a complete waste of money on my part. Then there's like the seasonings. If you want like jerky guns, jerky boards, jerky knives, meat slicers, everything starts to kind of add up. But again, if it's kind of like a hobby that you enjoy doing it, or you just kind of take pride in it, then it's well worth it. But if you're trying to do it just to save money, uh, it's hit and miss. It's kind of, yeah, it's personal preference, I'd say. But if you are wanting to do it, um, there's all sorts of videos on YouTube. Uh, YouTube's kind of getting a little iffy with that stuff these days. They're I wouldn't say they're banning it and they're not showing it, but I don't know. Bearded Butchers is a phenomenal place to check out. Or not a place, a YouTube channel to check out. They run through everything. They have wild game, they have deer specific, they have cows, pig, buffalo. They show recipes, all that good stuff. And then also, if you just type in whatever it is that you're doing, like YouTube is a giant search engine. So even myself, I have like how to make black bear pepperoni. Like it's extremely specific on what I made. And basically, there's so many videos out on YouTube now. No matter what it is that you're making, you'll find a video and you can just watch it, pause it, put it on your phone, and have it right there on the table with you while you're doing it. And yeah, you'll be able to figure it out real quick. And it at first it seems like quite a daunting task, and it might be a little bit overwhelming, but it's one of those things where as soon as you start doing it, and every once in a while you'll cut through a slice of meat and it'll look like nothing, and then you turn it and you go, oh, that looks kind of like a ribeye. Huh, cool. And then you look and you're like, oh, that is a ribeye. Oh, well, then I guess if I left these ribs attached and cut it like this, that'd be a rib steak. And then if I make a slice here, peel that rib meat back, and then slice it and leave that entire rib bone on, well, now that's a tomahawk steak. And there's like the amount of cuts and stuff and all the names. Don't worry about it. Don't get overwhelmed. Just look at the primal cuts. You have the steaks, the roast, the hamburger. Don't worry about it. At the end of the day, you're cutting up your own meat, and if you screw up, don't sweat it. Worst case scenario, put it in the burger bin and just grind it. So if your steaks aren't, that perfectly symmetrical and squared up and look all nice and pretty, or it doesn't look like how that guy, who cares? Uh, when it comes out the other end, it's not too pretty either. So, yeah, if your steaks don't look 100%, who cares? Enjoy it, have fun, experiment. Uh, like I said, like tomahawk steaks. I've made tomahawk steaks with deer before, and they're one of those things where it's like you hear tomahawk steak, you think a big burly macho man. You make a tomahawk steak with a deer, and it's the cutest little thing you've ever seen. This itty bitty rib bone that's that big and a little steak like that on the end of it. But then you can also make your ribs and stuff, and if you just kind of wing it and you just cut a slab of the ribs off with a saw or an axe and you just call it ribs. You take this whole thing of ribs and you just throw it on the barbecue, throw it on a bed of coals, caveman style, whatever. It's so much fun and it's cool doing it that way. I think that's the biggest payout for me is I can take something like they'll call it like a skirt steak. Really, that's that flab of meat that kind of holds like the bottom part of the guts on. Uh, a lot of guys when they're butchering, like as soon as you knock the hide off, you have this weird flab of skin sitting there. They take the knife, they cut it, and they just toss that off to like the ravens and stuff. Where if you take that and cook it up over the barbecue, it's a great little chunk of meat. There's a lot of fat and stuff in there too. It almost looks like bacon, which is where kind of bacon comes from on a pig. But yeah, it's pretty cool. And then like neck roast and stuff like that, you can grind it up, throw it into burger, or you can go. Wonder what that would be like if you braised it for 4 hours. You know, take a knife, cut around it to the bone, take your handsaw, cut the bone off. You have a nice little chunk like this. It looks like a ossobuco, just 4 times bigger because it's a deer neck, not a small little shank. And you can experiment with your food that way, and it's really cool when you're starting to do stuff like that, or you know whatever. There's a lot of things that you can do, and in the end it is very rewarding. Just I wouldn't go into it thinking that you're gonna save a pile of money because Once you buy the knives, and you buy the meat grinder, then you start eyeing up the jerky guns. Then you start looking at dehydrators. Then you start looking at smokers, and then you start looking at bigger smokers. Um, and then in the end, eventually, once you do have everything, and if you do a bunch of butchering yourself, like if you're in a place where you can shoot, like 4 deer a year, then absolutely you're gonna save up, some money by doing it this way. But if you're gonna be a guy that kind of shoots one deer every year, two or three or 10 like me, I don't even remember the last deer I shot, uh, or the last mule deer, anyways. Um, then it's you do it for the fun of it, or the necessity of it, or just so you have the knowledge of somewhat how to do it. But yeah. Anyways, I think that's all for me today. I kind of just blabbered on bits here and there, and I kind of jumped all over the place. But hopefully, it was enjoyable for you guys. And if you happen to get yourself a deer, you know, heck, give butchering a go and see if you like it. Maybe for your first time, just YouTube some videos, see if you can borrow a buddy's grinder or whatever. You don't have to buy one yourself. And yeah, give it a try, see if you like it. If you don't, ah, there's not too many people that do. Uh, but yeah, give it a try. Do some experiments. If you see a chunk of meat that looks tender, don't be afraid to set it to the side, put it on a plate, wrap it up, do whatever, put it in the fridge. When you're done, cook it up, and just see. And then for next time whether it's a good steak or not. Uh, there's been a couple of times where I've looked at a chunk of meat and went, wow, look how tender that is. As soon as it hit the frying pan, it just went, and it just tensed straight up, and it was not enjoyable to eat. But anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, hit the little like button there. Leave me a comment or two. Let me know if you do up your own butchering or not. And subscribe to the channel. Catch you on the next one.